Gary DePaul with Unlabeled Leadership. Welcome to Episode 4, Judy Hale and the Brown Suit. If you're curious about the title, well, stay with me. This is going to be a good one. Let's get started. When you meet Judy Hale for the first time, your unconscious bias just might kick in. When you see and listen to her for the first time, Judy might remind you of a family member that you really enjoy talking with and having over for dinner. Well, that description might be true. And, there's an and, not a but, and Judy has a lot of depth to her. To start, she has a PhD from Purdue University, where she did her doctoral research on how to control bias in competency studies. She has so many published books as an author, I can't keep up with them all. There's one about performance-based certifications, another one on performance consulting, and another one that she did with Deb Page, who's a person you really should get to know, called the School Improvement Specialist Field Book. Here's one more. She did a book with Odin Westgard. This book is for training functions of an organization. It's about how they can use the Baldrige criteria and ISO standards to amp up the training department. If you're not familiar with Baldrige, let me tell you a little bit about it. There's something called the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Each year, 20 companies earn, and not win, they earn the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award. The award criteria are tough, and I don't think many companies can meet the standards. None of the companies that I worked for even came close. Okay, they came close in some areas, but meeting all the standards is a different thing. When it comes to standards and certifications, Judy Hale is by far one of the leading experts. Here's an example. For the International Society for Performance Improvement, ISPI, she, with a team, formed the standards and the criteria for the CPT certification, which stands for Certified Performance Technologist. The team was called the Kitchen Cabinet because the team met in the kitchen, Judy's kitchen, to work out the standards. Here's another layer about Judy. Judy is big on stewardship, and she has been involved in several committees, organizations. In 2001 and 2011, she was the president of ISPI. But that's just one example. If you go to her website, and the link is in the show notes, you can read more about her and what she's done. One more thing. People love and listen to Judy, not just her friends, board members, government chiefs, military brass, and of course colleagues want to learn from her insights. And her stewardship is contagious. Don Kirky, a friend and colleague, once told me that when Judy Hale asks you to help, you say yes, even before you know what you're supposed to do. And that gives you an idea of just how valuable Judy Hale is and the impact she has on people's lives. Part 1, Innovation is the New Currency. For many, parents shape who we are. What they say can have a lasting impact that helps shape our principles, the way we view the world, and the way we think. For her first story, Judy talks about her father. Check it out.
And one of the first one was actually from my dad, and I was in high school. And my dad told me this story. He said, Judy, when you go into the room, you're looking for the brown suit. He said,
okay.
You can always tell the health of an organization by whether or not there's a brown suit in the room. Now, please understand, my dad, he was in business where the men wore black suits, navy suits, white shirts, plain ties, And he always looked for the guy whose jacket didn't match his pants. He always looked for the guy who dared to wear a Hawaiian tie or a pink shirt. By the way, there were only men at his, please understand, this is in history. But that concept of the brown suit, because you need to know that my dad was the brown suit. My dad was a genius, but he was also illiterate in the fact that he didn't get to go to school. So his job was to calculate the fuel needs of the United States Air Force during World War II, Korea and Nam. When he gave his letter of resignation, they hired 5 PhDs in math to replace him. You see, because he was illiterate, he couldn't communicate how he solved the problems, but he could solve them. And his point was, Judy, if the leaders can't tolerate anyone who looks different, thinks different, acts different, they're not healthy. They can't grow, they can't adapt, they can't move. And his point was that he was one of the brown suitors, and he looked and needed a boss who wanted to enable him and not compete with him. And with that story, one of the other things he told me, he came home one day and he had a bounce to his step and a smile on his face. And I said, "Hey, Dad, what's going on?" He said, "It was a good day." I said, "What happened?" He said, "I got a new boss, and he doesn't know what I do, and he won't be in my face."
Nice.
And one of their core things had to do with technical competency. And I thought this is interesting because leaders don't need to compete with their people. In your principles, has to do with giving up control and believing in others.
When Judy said my principles, what she's referring to are the 7 guiding principles that I found when doing my leadership research. Giving up control, believing in others are 2 of the principles. I'll talk about these in future episodes. Here's Judy again.
And my dad, he just needed a boss who believed in him, who enabled him to do these incredible mathematical calculations with the benefit of a pencil and yellow paper, not a computer, nothing else, because he could do it. Anyway, his whole concept of the brown suit, I realized I'm frequently the brown suit myself. I don't look like, I don't talk like, I don't see what other people do. That doesn't make me a leader. It means that clients that can't tolerate that divergent view, be open to new dialogue, new perspectives, they're not providing the guidance necessary for their people to grow and be innovative. And by the way, innovation is a new currency. It's going to be a new currency for this decade. Anyway, that's my story. I realized that a story that I heard in high school, how pervasive that would be my entire life. I look for it now in my clients. I'll fire a client that doesn't have a brown suit in the room, doesn't have any sense of divergency. I see it in Google, one of my clients. I've been there numerous times. The level of collaboration, acceptance is incredible. Everybody in the room knows that they're smart. Everybody in the room knows that they were invited because everybody else knows they're smart. And everybody in the room knows that everybody else in the room is smart. And they know that the collaborative solution will be better than what any one of them could do. It's fascinating how they've set up this culture. Well, that's leadership that enables that. That's letting go. And one of your principles is, I think it has to do with believing in others, but it's really letting go of control, not pre-predicting how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to do the problem, but allowing and fostering people to come up with innovative approaches to doing things.
When you talk about your clients, the people you work with, if they don't have the brown suit, they may not be a good fit for you. And in coaching in that area, there's a lot of coaches that won't handle clients that don't want to be coached. They're not receptive, then they're not a good match. And it sounds like what you've picked up from your father has helped you manage the types of clients that you have and knowing who would be good for you to work with and who would be receptive of what you have to offer.
You need to know that I evaluate my clients as much as they evaluate me. And if I don't see any evidence that they really are receptive, I usually either will say I don't have time, or I'll give them the name of my competitor. By the way, I've had competitors call me up and say, what's real skinny for you? What's wrong with you? Because they're not a good fit for me.
Part 2, is it lip service or genuine commitment? Like a good symphony, Judy brings in her second story about her mother and blends it in with the first one. Here we go.
This kind of ties into the second story, which was actually from my mom. And my mom was a class clown growing up, okay? And she grew up, and boys weren't educated because they were going to work in the mines. The girls were educated because they were going to be teachers and nurses, and she was trying to be a nurse. And she is the one that told stories about the hypocrisy that she witnessed in her schooling and how terrible things she witnessed firsthand. And her point was, if you want to know where people are, it's not what they say, it's what they do. And that's something else. Is I didn't come up, my family was not somebody who went around and said, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. No, honey. But there was no question that I had the unconditional love of my parents because of their actions. They were always there. That gave me another view. Again, it's believing in others, if you will, is one of your principles. But it's easy for people to say, well, you know, we're supposed to be looking at diversity here. Well, it's one thing to give lip service. It's another thing to truly embrace that. So if there's no brown suit in the room, this is lip service. That's what I'm trying to say. If they, in fact, by their actions, you see no evidence for serious dialogue about what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, what we should be doing, and ownership for what's going on, this is nothing more than a Band-Aid. In other ways, it's one thing to expand your table and invite people. It's another thing to say, well, we have to support people. It's one thing to put out money. It's another thing to act on it. So you can call that hypocrisy. There's a lot of different ways of looking at it. I had not realized how much my parents had influenced me. Like all typical kids growing up, you know, our parents, we can find all their nits and gnats and warts and not like them. As I've gotten older, I realized how they have definitely shaped what it is that I do. I am the brown suit in my field, no question about it. I'm somebody who spots discrepancies between what you say and what you do. And I look for that. And I've had clients that I've worked with for long term because they don't give lip service. Their actions actually support what they say they believe in.
Thinking about lip service, what that reminds me is something that I went through this summer with the whole George Floyd murder. I don't know if you recall this. There were several CEOs that wrote public messages to customers, internally to employees, denouncing it, and it was a very, I don't know, empowering experience or uplifting experience. But a couple of months later, all that stuff went away.
Right.
And someone recently called that the unicorn effect. You think people are advancing in the right direction, but that ends up not being the case. Society put the environment, or the George Floyd murder put the environment where CEOs were compelled to respond. Whether they're continuing to do stuff, it's not as obvious. I think back in contrast to Ben and Jerry's. Back in 2016, right. I think it was, they had a webpage about Black Lives Matter. They wanted to live their values and express them publicly. So I'm thinking about not necessarily lip service and, okay, we got to do this, but an executive may feel pressured and feel like, man, we really need to do this, but the pressure is taken off and it kind of goes away.
Oh, now we're back to business, same old, same old. You know, you're right. It's being willing or able to step back and look at your policies, your procedures, your practices, and say, really, do they support what you just said publicly you want to support? Or have you built things in? I've been interested in the use of artificial intelligence as hiring and screening. And there's been some really interesting evidence that, you know, how the computer screens you and automatically drops you from the list because of subtle things. And it's really embedded bias is what it is. Mm. Where you went to school, your name, does it look like Midwestern Iowa or something else? It's interesting how we've inadvertently built in bias in areas where we think we're actually opening doors. And it requires us to be very critical about what we say we want to do versus what we're actually putting in place to have happen. I learned something from my dad about we must be open and acceptance to different ideas. In his world, it showed up in how you close, but it also showed up in other ways. And my mother It was to really know the difference between what people say versus what people do, and how important it is to, well, she was again the class clown, and her all of her stuff was pointing out the hypocrisies of the systems that she was seeing. I was never the class clown. I was the class nerd, but not the class clown. Go
It's
ahead.
amazing how our parents were around them a lot growing up, obviously, and there are role models. They shape how we view the world, and just like you explained, what both your parents have told you has shaped how you approach business.
Oh yeah, yeah. The other thing is that when I see discrepancies like that, I've just learned I can't be silent, and that's difficult. It's awkward. As I was younger, I would be silent. I wouldn't speak up, and I've learned that I must speak up, and I do. And I can speak up, and I can use reframes, and I have the skill sets to speak up in a way to not antagonize, not to further polarize. You know what I mean? So there's an art to being able to do that. I am not a leader, one of the people you talk about. I'm not one of those. Leaders are people who enable me to be effective. Because I'm, if you will, I'm the brown suit, I'm the nerd. I'm the one that will raise the unpopular issue, the difficult question.
You not only raise the unpopular issue, the elephant in the room, if you like, but you do it tactfully and try to approach at the level of the people you're talking to, so you can influence them.
Well, it's really, that's absolutely right. It's one thing to confront, and then you're being seen as an adversary, right?
Yes.
The art form is confronting, raising, and that can be through humor, it can be through irony, it can be through, well, there's a lot of techniques, reframing, whatever, to get people to step back and reflect on their own actions and behaviors. And you want to know if they have the wherewithal in doing that. Are they willing to say, we can do things different?
I like how you approach this. If there's something that's going on that's maybe not moral, you ask yourself, what can I do to help them become more moral or grow morally, to be able to overcome and address the situation versus the confrontation approach. And if you consider, what can I do to help these people become more moral in how they behave and how they do with this particular circumstance, you won't confront them. Just it's because you'll know confronting them is to lead to resistance.
They're entrenched, but you're being kinder.
Okay.
There's some people who are amoral, okay?
Yeah.
And I don't believe we can grow their morality or their insight. What you can do is affect the people around them, because those people actually have enablers around them.
Yeah.
And so how do you equip or tool the enablers to no longer be enablers? Some people are ignorant of their own actions and how immoral they are. And they do in fact learn and grow. Yes. So I want to please point that out. And that's wonderful when that happens, as they become insightful and say, wait a minute, this is not who I want to be. I want to be different. And let's put something in place. That's wonderful. But we do have some people out there who are not like that. But they survive because of the people around them, the enablers around them. And the goal then is to open the eyes of the enablers, showing how they are in fact enabling immoral actions. They have the power to change that, giving them insights, tools, courage, opening new ways for them. They can move ahead and go on.
Yeah, I really like that insight. When you're in corporate America, you're and a manager, in the moment, you may not recognize the concept of enablers, and it takes someone from the outside to really see what's going on, the dynamics with this one executive who behaves in a particular way and the enablers not realizing they're enabling. I like how you address them and gear towards them, because addressing the executive that's behaving in the way that's unhealthy would not help.
Again, you always want to be surprised, and hopefully that they will come to some insight and choose to change. And that does sometimes happen. But frequently, it's actually the enablers around them. That's where you have the power. We all have support systems, and those support systems are critical to our health, physical, emotional, everything else. So I'm a big believer of these support systems. However, sometimes we need to step back and say, have we become too close?
Part 3, Raising Our Awareness About Opportunities. Imagine that you're walking down a corridor full of doors. Some are locked, some unlocked, some are cracked open, some are fully open. While walking, you don't notice the doors. You don't even see them. Okay, here's the point. The doors are symbolic for opportunities. We go through life and there's all these opportunities around us, but we don't see them in front of us. Maybe it's because we're too busy and we're just focused on what we're trying to accomplish. Or maybe we're just not interested and we're happy with how things are going. We start to see opportunities when something happens. You don't get a promotion, you get laid off, someone's in the hospital. It could be a number of triggers that make opportunities visible to us. Judy talks about the doors of opportunities. Here she is.
Are there opportunities that we could create for ourselves, or maybe out there that we could just take access to, that would give us opportunity to hear people we don't normally get a chance to hear from, or witness, or observe? And how can we best do that? So the Association for example, is offering this We Welcoming Environment. It's opened doors for me, and it would have been very comfortable for me to sit back and do nothing. Everybody else who's going to be listening to, they're going to have opportunities in front of them, and that could be to read somebody different, attend something that they normally wouldn't go to, in order to get a perspective that they wouldn't maybe ordinarily have. It was Mark Twain, I think, who talked about if you travel was how you got rid of bigotry. Well, one of the opportunities, now because of COVID, we can't, but do we have an opportunity when we go traveling? Could we not just do the museums and the tourist stuff? Could we maybe say, show me your grocery store? Could we ask to go to an elementary school? Could we see a neighborhood? Could we look at things not as the way the tourist guides would like us to see things, but could we do things that gives us a chance to get an insight on what's really going on? I know when I went to South Africa and Nigeria and China and places, well, that was, I said, I want to go to an elementary school. I want you to take me to your grocery store. I want to know where you shop. Yes, we all want to see, the great tombs and the museums. That's wonderful. That's wonderful to experience those firsthand. But they really do not reflect what's going on in that culture. They don't speak to that. So there's some things that we can do. And what door can we open to let somebody new in our life? It doesn't mean we have to become bosom buddies, but to get a chance to hear them in a new way.
There's all these doors out there that can be opened that could give someone new opportunities. But what's interesting is that there's so many of them out there, we don't see them. If something goes wrong, for example, you're applying for jobs, you don't get jobs, that might open up a new opportunity for you to do something else.
Right.
Or if you're laid off, it might open up some opportunities that you didn't see before. Look for those opportunities that you may not normally see in your day-to-day life and try to use them as a way to grow yourself and to open up new opportunities that you wouldn't have had before.
There was a webinar about the Latinx, Hispanic people, heritage, talking about equity, okay? So I signed in for, that was where I was first introduced to Latinx, and why that's important to them. And the issues about their language, everything's male or female, they don't have a they. And it was just fascinating. They talked about their own world, gave me a whole new kind of view. And these were young people about trying to pursue the careers and what they were doing. Some were Puerto Rican, some were Mexican, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They talked about how they're different and how they're like. It made me think back in Chicago, this community is actually not unified. The Puerto Ricans don't talk to the Mexicans don't talk to the Cubans, you know what I mean? Everybody's different, right? And they're trying to hold on to their heritage. And they have the challenge of trying to get women to do screen themselves mammograms for breast cancer. And so they asked, what's the one thing they have in common? And it was the priest. So they went to all the churches and worked with the priest to say, can you talk to your congregations? And the other thing they all had in common was hairdressers. They have beauty salon. So they went to the beauty salon. This is a group that I naively, from the outside, think of as a single unified group, which they are not. How do we communicate and how do we understand them and how do we work with them? And when I went to this webinar, these 3 young women and 3 young men talked very openly about their differences and their likenesses and the challenges that their language, this was also about the gender identity issues, that everything's either male or female in their language. There is no they. And I thought, wow, how insightful. How do they deal with that? And they came up with the term Latinx. And I hadn't realized it's a heritage or it's back. Anyway, that was a simple door to open. Am I home free on this? No way. But they certainly widened my perspective that I had not had before.
The story of the priest in the hair salon resonates with me. It reminds me of someone named Daryl Davis, who is a Black man. Mm-hmm. He made friends with people in the KKK, and very famously so. And in doing so, what his message is, if you're not talking, then you can't solve problems.
No, you can't. That's right.
If you're not talking, then you're fighting. Keep the conversation going.
You got it. And this, how do we then foster an opportunity just to have that conversation? When I see behaviors that disgust me, if I attack, I just divide. I've got to figure out ways to respond that in fact lead to stopping those behaviors. And one way is talking and maybe getting the person their own insight, and that works sometimes. Another way is looking at the enablers around them and giving them the tools and the insight and the courage, not just continue supporting those people.
I like how you bring that back with the enablers and tie it in to what you were talking about earlier. That's great.
Well, again, this is kind of what I learned from my mom. What can people do? I think that, again, they can look at their own sphere, and I don't want them to give it up because that support system is critical to their own health. But ask where there are opportunities to see a different picture of the world, to have a deeper understanding of what is going on in this world and why it is. And the other thing is I'm getting much more aware of economics. What are the economics incentives? Who benefits from the status quo? Who would benefit from the change? I think we really need to get a lot smarter about economics and really ask questions about how the money works in this world. When you buy at a store, what is that store's philosophy? Are you supporting them of doing things that you don't believe in? Are you aware of what companies own really what companies? We are, in fact, an oligarchy, not a democracy. And we don't understand that. And part of that's because our finances are controlled by just a very few people. They decide our interest rates, they decide who gets loans, they decide a lot of things that we don't realize. And sometimes when we shop, we're actually perpetuating behaviors we say we don't want to see. So how do we get smart about that? And I do not have an easy answer, Gary, so please understand, I'm looking for this.
Okay.
But I really do think I've been trying very hard to get much smarter.
Judy Hale, thank you. Go to our website, find the link in the show notes, and think about having virtual coffee with her. Thanks to everyone who's made donations. Your donations are what keep us on the air. Think about going to iTunes and rating the show. Write about what you liked. Maybe I'll read it on the air in a future episode. Finally, thank you for listening. I'm Gary DePaul. Lead on.